How did the afternoon project go yesterday? How are you guys feeling with core data so far? Pretty good? All right. Good. That's awesome.
Actually, I did have an issue,
Okay.
but it wasn't really like code. It was more of an issue with like my info P list. I don't know what happened, but usually when I move my when I put an info P list in a file, usually I just go back to like the project and then I just select it and it just works out fine.
Yeah.
This time, like I just could not find my info P list at all. So like I had an issue with that, but
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
pretty sure that's like I'm
sorry.
pretty sure that's got to be like some kind of bug. I'm pretty sure it's got to be some kind of bug with Xcode, the update with Xcode. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think it is. So like the button like right here didn't ever appear. Is that what you're talking about?
So it did appear, and I was able to even like it even gave me the option to like find it.
Oh, interesting.
Wait, like you know how like like if it doesn't find the info P list, it basically tells you to basically find it, right?
Yeah.
So like
So for me, and maybe this is different for you, but every time that I've done this with Xcode 11, it just can't find it. Like, and it doesn't show that button there either, which is a pain. Um, I don't know why this is yelling now. Or maybe you just like found it for real. What you can do if that happens though is like if you go into this build settings and you just look for info.plist, this is where if you just find this info.plist file, you can say, so like, for example, if I move this over to like view controllers, this would be tasks/view controllers. That's all that button does. But it's kind of a pain to have to do yourself. Like having the button's nice. So I hope in the next version of Xcode, like the new update, they just put that back because I don't foresee a reason why they would take it out. So that would fix the problem for sure, though. You probably already figured that out, though. All right, let's go ahead and dive in, guys. So. All right. So I don't think oh, you know what? I don't need to record. Thanks, James. For today, what we're going to be doing is actually building off of yesterday's project, and we're going to just keep building onto this project the whole week. I'm not sure I mentioned that yesterday. So let's all jump into the tasks project from yesterday. And again, if you don't have a working copy, the one that I slacked yesterday is just like 8 messages up in the iOS 10 channel. It's just called Tasks Day 1 finished October 14th that you can go ahead and grab. So I'll give you guys a second to pull that up and then we'll start talking about migrations. So while you guys are pulling that up, let's just kind of review the training kit content. These are what we're going to be talking about today. They're 2 modules, and we'll spend probably about an hour on each. Might not be quite that cut and dry, but the first part is talking about what's called lightweight migration in order to migrate an older core data store to a newer version. So I'll talk about kind of what that means, and then we're also going to use what's called an NSFetch results controller to create a table view populated with core data objects. And you may say, well, we made a table view work with core data yesterday. But what the NSFetch results controller does is it's a very, very efficient and it's an efficient way of doing it, but also you get a lot of like really cool functionality for free. So we'll be kind of looking at that. And what I want to show you is the just kind of the project at the point that we will have it at the end of the guided project today. Can you guys hear me okay so far still? Okay, is the screen like super blurry or anything? No? Oh, okay, awesome. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be adding on sort of like a priority onto our tasks. So I could go ahead and create a task. Well, that needs to be fixed, but that's okay. So like finish the guided project. Say that's a critical task, and then we'll say October 15th. So watch what happens here, and I'll actually slow down the animation so you can see this because it looks really cool. But instead of just how we're doing things now, where when we go back to this view controller, it right now calls the view will appear and it just reloads the table view. Instead, this NSFetch results controller is going to go ahead and insert sections and rows for us and move them if it needs to. So I'm going to hit save right here. Oh, yeah, and you couldn't really see this section being animated in, but if you saw like this cell, these cells were kind of pushed down. So let's see if we can get maybe I'll go from normal to critical here. Oh, I think I know why it's not working, especially for the moving. But it all is just a little bit more fluid than just kind of the like snap and everything is changed type of thing that we're doing with reloading the table view. So the first part is going to be making it so that we have a priority on our task model object. The problem is now that we're dealing with persistence and we've got some persisted data, it's not quite as easy as just going in and changing, and just like going into your task.swift file and adding a property. So let's kind of talk about this. The problem is we have this task entity right now, and we've said, hey, we've got a name, we've got some notes. That's awesome. But when we say, hey, now we want to add a priority onto this, there are a couple things that we need to consider. What happens to the tasks that, for example, don't have priorities, like the ones that we saved from yesterday? How do we get those to sort of move over? And so we need to basically do what's called a migration to make it so that we go from one version of this model object to the other. There are basically two ways that you could do this using core data. The first one is lightweight migration, which is what we're doing today, and I'll talk about what that means. And then the other one is using those mapping model files that I said we'll talk about today. So let's go to core data again. I want to go to, oh, sorry, it's going to take me just 1 second to find this page. There we go. Okay. All right, lightweight migration. So what lightweight migration means is it's basically automatic. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we want to migrate from one version of this model to this new version with now the priority property. And the best part is we don't really have to do anything to make that work. So when you're migrating data over, the whole thing is you have to figure out, like, what if you, for example, change this and you're like, I don't want this to be name, but I want it to be like task name or something. In the persistent store on your phone's hard drive, you've already got those things that we saved previously called name. They still have that. And so we need a way to sort of map, the old attribute name, which is name, to something new called task name. There are all of these things that you basically have to go in and map, the old version to the new version and sort of figure out how to do that. The good part about lightweight migration is it will do that for you. You don't really have to do it. So let's talk about kind of what you can get and what you can migrate for free, basically using this lightweight migration. So it says, so it's talking about this mapping model, which is that file, and it just generates that for you. That's why it's automatic or free. But these are the things that you can have happen for free with lightweight migration. You can add an attribute. So what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be adding a priority. We could remove one. Maybe we say, we don't want notes in our tasks anymore. That would also be able to be migrated for free. A non-optional attribute becoming optional, and then an optional attribute becoming non-optional, and defining a default value. I'll talk about these in just a second when we actually begin the migration on our end. And again, what the term optional doesn't mean Swift optional, and that's like the weird part. Or you can rename an entity. So maybe we say, we want to call this task to instead, to do or something. That would work as well. So any of those things can be handled for you for lightweight migration. The best part about that is that's most of everything you'll ever want to do. There are pretty few times that you'll ever come across, and I've had to use a mapping model like once or twice, and more than anything, it was just so I could learn how to do it. But I've never come across a situation in my own personal projects, my own apps, that I've had to sort of go above lightweight migration and do it myself, which is awesome. So yeah, it's just talking about like if you had a car entity to an automobile, a color attribute to paint color, for example. It can manage relationships, and I haven't talked about relationships too much. There isn't a point in the like in these 4 modules that we explicitly talk about what relationships are. However, I did record a supplementary video that you guys can watch if you're interested in learning about that. But that would be how you can basically have something like, let's take maybe the afternoon project from yesterday, which is the journal. And instead of just having the entry entity, and basically the whole app is a single journal, maybe we kind of expand that and say you can have multiple journals that each have their own entities. If you wanted to sort of set up that relationship between journal and entries, you would need a relationship in Core Data here. And my video shows on how to do that. So if you're interested in that, you're more than welcome to watch it, although there's nothing in the curriculum that needs it. So I kind of recommend you do it anyway. Yeah, and that's essentially it. So the best part is you really don't have to do much for this. So let's go ahead and do that, where we actually add the priority attribute onto it. So what we want to do is we want to basically generate a new version of this data model file here and say, hey, this is our original version that we're sort of going from, and then we need a new model version that we're going to go to with that priority. And then it's able to sort of see like where it came from, what version of the model version, what model version the tasks, for example, that were created previously we're using, which is this one right here. Then I can say, oh, they want to go to this new one, and it can figure out how to do that migration for us. Excuse me. Are there any questions about what migration is before we go ahead and actually do it? We feeling okay with this so far? Okay. So what we have to do is let's select the data model file, just make sure we're on this screen here, and then go to Editor, Add Model Version. This only shows up when we're on a data model file. Then it's going to pull up this drop down here, and it's just going to ask you to give a name to this new version. I generally just leave it as is. It's just going to be like tasks 2, or the next time that you make it, it would say tasks 3. If you don't like that, you can name it something else. If you have, some other way that you want to kind of keep track of everything, that's cool. And it's going to say it's based on the model, and it's going to take one model version as sort of the base from which it basically makes a copy of, some model version. So we only have one model version, so it's just going to base it on the one that we have. So if you hit finish here, you'll see that now we have this little triangle disclosure indicator on our data model file. and you can drop it down. And now we actually have two smaller XC data model files without the D. And those are our two model versions. So this tasks data model is our original one, and this tasks 2 is this new one. And you can see they look the exact same, and that's why the task 2 is based off of tasks. So on this task 2 is the one that we want to add our priority attribute to. So go ahead and select tasks 2, and then let's just add a new attribute, and let's just call it priority. And then we'll set its type to be a string. Oops. There we go. Okay, so a couple things. This isn't related to migrations necessarily, but I said I'd talk about these few things that we didn't cover yesterday. So transient is really cool. Transient is basically like saying that you have some property on your model object that you don't actually want to save to core data, but it's transient. It just kind of is there in memory while the task exists, but it doesn't actually get saved into the persistent store itself. So you could have something, basically, I mean, if we said that the priority was transient, this value would never actually get saved to core data to the persistent store, but you would be able to use it within, the app itself while it's running. So that's kind of what it's for. It's not something you use too often, although it can be nice for things like, don't do this, just watch me here, but maybe you had like an image data property. And I talked a little bit yesterday about how you generally don't want to save very large files or very large amounts of data inside a single task. Like saving images, for example, would be something that probably is better used not in core data. Instead, you would probably just save the URL to the image. But if you wanted to have an image data property that was transient, you would be able to like put image data to a specific task, but then it wouldn't actually like store that on your phone's hard drive. It would just get rid of it as soon as the app is closed, which can be kind of nice. So that's what transient means. So after a little research between me and Andrew, we figured out that derived basically means that it is similar to a computed property in that you can use it to like derive its value from something else on here. So an example Andrew came up with was, let me see if I can find it. Like, for example, if you have like maybe we're using this name to search for a task. So as an example, if we have the Pokemon API, it's actually case sensitive. So if I make like this Pokemon Eevee, capital E Eevee, you'll see that it actually doesn't work because it needs it to all be lowercase. So what we could do is say that we have this name property, and then we could have like a search name property that's still a string, but it's derived, and then you basically use an NS, what's called an NS expression to say like, hey, use this name property and lowercase it or do whatever you want. And it's basically just computing its value based off of some other property. That's essentially what that means. And I've never used it, but that's kind of what you would use it for, I suppose. And okay, yeah, any questions on derived or transient before we talk about optional? Okay. So optional is important when we're doing migrations. What it means is, and you may have noticed this, like if we, again, have a task, just watch me here. So if we, say like task.name or whatever, task.notes, they're optional. And that's sort of on purpose, but that has nothing to do with these being optional here. So if I uncheck these for both of them, when I build this and everything, you'll see when I go back and access the task.name and nodes, they're still optional. So that's not quite what it means. What it means is, are these properties required to essentially have a, to like migrate this over? So as an example, for our tasks2 data model, if we have this be non-optional right now, oh shoot, you know what? Let me run the app again and just clear out my data store here, just so I don't have anything with it, with a task or with a priority from the other version of this project, because they actually share the same core data store. So what this would mean is I require that there is a priority here no matter what, even if I'm migrating over from a version that didn't have a priority. Does that kind of make sense, like conceptually? Okay, I'm going to come back to this in just a second. I'll show you what happens. The way that we actually say, hey, I want to use this new version of my data model file is we're going to go over to the data model, and you should just be able to select this little file inspector here that looks like a little sheet of paper. Jump down to the model version where it says tasks and change it to tasks2. And we're saying, hey, use this version of my data model as sort of the current version that should be generated and used in code. So you can see just by us doing that, if I go back here, now if I say task.priority, it knows that it exists. It knows that that's a thing. So I'm just going to run this with this non-optional priority here. And we'll see that it fails. So let's see what it says here. An error occurred during persistent store migration. That's not super helpful, but what it will do is it's going to say, yeah, so it says validation error, missing attribute values on mandatory destination attribute. And it doesn't actually say which it is, but I know that it's the priority. So it's saying, hey, you said that you 100% need a priority here, but like there was no priority from the old version of tasks, which didn't have a priority. So I basically can't load it. And so your app crashes and, you know, it's not able to load things correctly because they're not the same. So this isn't the migration's fault. This is our fault. So what we can do instead is we can say, hey, no, that's fine if it's optional. If I just do this, you'll notice that it doesn't crash again. It works fine. Or maybe we say, no, but I really do want a priority. Like in this app here, I basically am requiring them to make a priority. So I think it makes sense for this to be non-optional in this case. So what we can do though, is we can go back and I want to keep this as non-optional here, but what we can do is we can give it a default value here. And it's going to default here to be an empty string, which I think is like kind of nice for some situations. But for us, we can just say, maybe we want the default priority to be like a normal priority or something. And we could choose this. And what happens is when it migrates these old versions of tasks that never had a priority over to this new model version with a priority, it'll say, do you have a value for priority? Yes or no. And if it does, it'll just take that. Otherwise, it's going to say, let's give you this default value so there actually is a value there. And that's how you can make it so that things are non-optional. Even if they didn't have a value before, we'll just give it one right now. So what I want you to do is just put normal there for the priority. And so everything that didn't have a priority before will have normal now. Okay, what questions do you have about this optional default values? Anything about migrations, really? Okay, so you're all experts at this?
Yeah, basically.
All right, perfect. That's awesome.
No, actually, I did have a question. I was just trying to figure out a way to phrase it.
Yeah,
When you say that you're providing a default value, I was thinking of yesterday's assignment where we had to provide default values for when we were calling the initializer. Is this just a different way of doing the same thing, or is there a fine distinction between the two?
there's definitely a distinction. They don't do quite the same thing, although they do a similar thing, if that makes sense. This default value is only going to get used when you've got like tasks that you've already previously created, like from yesterday, and it's trying to move them over to this new version of the model. Whereas the initializer, where you give it a default value, that would be when it's creating completely new tasks, is when that initializer would get called.
Okay, so this is just in the context of migration. Apologies.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Yeah, mostly. It doesn't have to be just in the context of migration. Like in theory, you could just make it so that, your initializer never even takes in a priority and it just defaults to this even on new ones as well. But most of the time, I've never really used it that way, but you could in theory. Just as soon as one is created, it'll set this to normal if there isn't a priority, whether it's new or old. But then in the initializer, you like set it to be whatever you want it to be. So, all right, can you give me a 1 to 3 on how you feel with the process of setting up this part of the migration? So adding a model version, adding a new attribute, deciding whether it needs to be optional or not, and potentially giving it a default value. Okay, cool. It's pretty good. So the cool part is that's really all we have to do as far as this goes. And sort of the hard part behind the scenes is taken care of the actual migration itself. So now what we need to do is just go ahead and refactor our code and basically go through, models, views, and controllers and update them so they all will actually be able to interact with priorities. So let's go ahead and jump to the, let's go through the views first, I think. So go ahead and open up the assistant editor. Well, actually, we don't have to open up the assistant editor quite yet. Just go ahead and open up the storyboard. And we're going to add a segmented control here. So we're luckily kind of already using a stack view here to hold the name and notes, and then the notes and this text field, or text view, sorry. So all we're going to do is I'm actually just going to make this a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is select this smaller stack view that has the name and the notes, and I'm just going to copy it. So if you just select it over here in the document outline, you can just click, or you can just do Command C and Command V, and it should duplicate it right below it. And that's just, yeah. Sorry, what did you say?
Do you do that again? I missed.
So just select this lower stack view here and just do Command C and then Command V. And it will just make a copy and we're just pasting it. And then it just happens to be pasted right below it since we're in a stack view. The only reason we're doing this is because we need us, like I want to basically put a stack view here that holds a label and this segmented control, and we just kind of get the stack view and the label for free. So now we can just go ahead and delete this text field. And then I'll change this label to say priority. And then we can throw in a segmented control right into this stacked view. So it's wanting me to kind of drag on one side or the other of the stacked view. I'm just going to put it on the right side here so that it jumps into sort of this smaller stack view here. Right. So have you used segmented controls before? I always forget.
Yeah, we use them.
We have. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is just add a couple segments onto this. So we've got 4. So we're going to add these segments right here. I'll just throw this over to the side. So low, normal, high, and critical. Just like that. So if you go to the attributes inspector on the segmented control, there's this segments part where you can just use this stepper and add it up to 4. And then you can either double click on the text here, and it's a little bit tricky when there's no text, to set each title, or you can use this little drop down menu right here and select each segment and then set the title in here. So we'll do like low, normal, high, and critical. So then you can see on the left of our segmented control here, it's actually red. It's getting mad at us because we have the priorities of each of these views, both the segmented control and this label that confusingly also says priority, have basically the same, it's the same priority as far as which one should basically kind of get squished down to make up for the room that the other one needs. So what I'm going to do is select my label here and go to the size inspector, and down here in the content hugging priority and the content compression resistance priority, what I'm going to do is on this horizontal, we're just going to change the horizontal compression resistance priority to 751. So you can just use this little stepper to the right of it. And this priority is higher than the segmented control, which is also 750. So since they were both 750, they were basically saying like, I don't know which thing to squish down. But now we said, hey, this label has a higher priority, so this should resist getting compressed or squished down. It resists basically more than anything with a lower priority. And so it says, okay, I'll go ahead and squish the segmented control. That's just making it so that this like doesn't get squished. Otherwise, if we had the segmented controls priority to be higher, it would say, no, the segmented control needs more space, so I'll squish the label. So it's just basically you deciding which one needs more space. Just change that right there. All right, are there any questions on what we have so far in the storyboard? Anything you need me to do again? Okay, cool. So let's go to the detail view controller in the attributes, or sorry, in the assistant editor. And I'm just going to make my priority segmented control an outlet. Oops. So I'll just call it priority segmented control. It's pretty common to either for segmented controls to call it like something segmented control or like something selector. Either way, those are probably the two most common ways of naming a segmented control. All right, so now that we've got this priority segmented control here, we need to think about, well, I want you to think about what would be the next step in making it so that our tasks actually have this priority, that they select from the segmented control. How do we save that information in core data?
We would need to update the initializer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to actually update our initializer for our task so that it can take in a priority, right? Because right now, it's not. And because of what we've done here in the priority attribute where we've given the default value, it would work and everything would run, but everything would have a normal priority. That's not quite what we want. So how could we update this initializer? Any guesses?
Just add it in there. So
Yeah.
Priority of type string.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, you're right. I think this is a perfect time for us to use an enum just so that we don't mess up like any of these names, right? I don't want to misspell critical because I've definitely done that in the past. So let's make an enum that represents each of these 4 priorities because it's a perfect time since we already are sort of limited by the amount of options we have. So it's like, I think, a perfect candidate. I'm going to do this just above this enum here, or above the extension here, just because they're fairly closely related. But if you want, you could actually make a new Swift file for it. That would be completely fine. I'm going to call it task priority, if I can spell. Priority, there we go. And I'm going to have them have raw values that are strings. So I'll say case low, case normal, case high, and case critical. So with that, what we can do is we can say, in our initializer priority, and that's going to be of type task priority, it's essentially doing exactly what Austin said, although we're just making it so that we can really only choose from these 4 things. But the thing with that is, just watch me here, you don't have to go here. If we look back in the data model, the priority is of type string, and so his thinking was completely correct. So now what we need to do is just change or not change, but when we set like self.priority equal to something, we need to do priority, but we're going to use the raw value, and that's why we added the string raw values to this enum here. So we've updated the view so that it has a way for us to select the priority. We've updated the initializer. And now you'll notice if you try to build the project, it yells at us because now the initializer that we have in our model controller is now out of date because it now has a priority. So this is the process for doing anything with migrations, especially when you're like adding or removing attributes. is you just kind of have to go through the whole range of MVC and make sure that your models, your model controllers, your views and view controllers just now match with whatever you changed. So with our create task function, we're going to need to call now, have this attribute with the priority, but we actually need a priority in the first place. So let's make another argument in the create task function to actually pass in a priority. So we'll just say priority is of type task priority. So then we can pass that in there. So we're just sort of forwarding that over from wherever calls create task. And it's not necessarily yelling at us, but we could also have a priority that we, like an existing priority, and change its priority to something else. So let's update the update task function to also include a priority. So we'll say task dot priority equals our priority dot raw value. For whatever reason, raw value doesn't want to autocomplete for me, which is a little weird, but it should be okay. It compiles, and that's what matters. Okay, so now it's going to yell at us in our detail view controller because we're not including the priority. So this is where it sort of comes full circle. Now that we have the model ready to be updated with priority, and we actually have the views to grab that priority, we can go ahead and do that in our save action where we actually figure out what the priority should be. So there's a few ways that we can do this. Basically what we need to do is we need to figure out which segment is selected. Do you guys remember the property on a segmented control that lets us know what segment is selected? It's okay if you don't.
Is it selected index?
Yeah, the selected segment index, perfect. So let's grab that. I'm just gonna say let index equal priority. Oh, you know what? Actually, I don't think that's optional. My bad. Let index equal priority segmented control. That's selected segment index. Now we know which one is selected. Well, at the very least, it's index. So there are a few ways on how we could take this index and actually get a priority from it. What I want you to do is take 5 minutes and try to work through it yourself. So ultimately what I want you to do is use the index to get a priority. Sorry, I'm going to say a task priority. And then pass it into the create and update task functions below. There are a few ways you can do this, and we'll go over a couple ways before the break, and then we'll talk about it. So go ahead and take about 5 minutes to do that, and then when you finish, you're more than welcome to kind of take a break, but please try to do it. I'm going to turn off my camera and my microphone, but I'll still be here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm going to see if my internet is working now. All right, let's go over this. Did anyone get it working? Or at least building? I mean, we haven't really quite tested this, but. Is anyone interested in sharing how they did it? Because there's probably a few ways that you did it, and that's awesome.
Is it if like segmented controller or whatever you called it, dot selected selected segment index equals 0, then it prints the number, I mean the raw value.
Yeah.
Low, print low.
Sure. Yeah. That's on the right track. We don't quite just want to print it, but we want to actually use it. But yes, that's on the right track. So we could say let priority, you type task priority. And then what we could do is say, if it's 0, then, priority equals low. Oh, excuse me. We could actually use, there's nothing wrong with this. We already actually kind of put the index in here. So just to make this a little bit easier to read, what we could do is just say, if index equals 0, then we could say, if index equals 1, right, we can go down the line here. That's definitely one way of doing it. Thank you.
You could also make your enum case iterable, so you can get the action of all cases.
Definitely, yep. Oh, sorry, that's supposed to be high. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. So there's this sweet protocol called case iterable that you use on your enums to make it so that you're basically able to iterate through them like you would a for loop. And what that allows you to do is basically it will create an array of all of your cases for you. So in order for that to work, all you have to do is say that it conforms to the case iterable protocol, and it will give us that array. So then what that does for us is we could say, let priority, I'm just gonna call mine priority 2 just because I already have this one up here. We could say task priority, the enum dot all cases, and then we could use the index and just subscript it like you would an array. For whatever reason, and I wish they would have fixed this in Xcode 2, in Xcode 11, is the all cases tends to be defaulted to a capital A, and it says you can't use that, which is weird, but all you need to do is just change it to lowercase a, all cases, and then it's totally fine. That's what it should be. It didn't used to put it to be capitalized A, but it does now, so. So these two things do the same thing. Did anyone do it differently? Because I can definitely think of a way or two that we could have done this differently as well.
I just did a switch statement to make it slightly simpler than all the ifs.
Yeah, definitely. A switch statement would work. It's the same logic, right? But we just instead switch on the index, say case 0, our task priority. I'm not going to write out the whole thing, but you would do the same thing where you just say, equals is low, and then go through this all of these and do basically this same logic as our if statement. Perfect. Did anyone do it differently other than that? Because I'd say that probably covers most of the cases that I think anyone would use, but if anyone did it differently, I'd be interested to see it. Okay, cool. I just want to point out, we've got a fair range of different ways that we did this, meaning the amount of code that we had to write, but that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. I think there's definitely something to be said for concise code, but there's also something to be said for readable code. So I would always go for the more readable code you have, the better it is. It's really cool sometimes to see these like quick one-liners and just like mapping, then flat mapping, then filtering, then reducing all in one line. And it looks awesome, but at the same time, it takes you a little bit to decipher things. So there's definitely something to be said for just pure readability. So however you did it is awesome. That's great. Ultimately, all we want is just the priority. So I'll just use the one with the if statement here. And then what we can do is just pass that right into our update task function, and then pass it into the create task function. Making sure we put it in the right place. That should make it work. Are there any questions on how we use the selected segment index to get the priority and then put it into the create and update task functions? We feeling okay with that? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a real break now, and we'll come back and talk about fetch results controllers, because that's basically all we needed for the migration. So you're welcome to run this now and make sure that everything works. The only thing we haven't done yet is just creating an update views function, or updating the update views function. But other than that, it should work. So see you guys in about 5 minutes. All right, guys, welcome back. Sorry, Jonathan, I just saw that message. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm just going to get rid of this stuff. You don't have to if you want to keep those multiple examples. I'm just trying to get everything onto one line here or one screen. Okay, so what we've got here is sort of an example of, like, everything that we just did is an example of how you would go about migration. So let's kind of just break it down into the individual steps that we took here. So we need to update the data model with a new version, and then go through and update the model's initializer if necessary, which generally it is. We'll talk about when it's not tomorrow. Update the views, so basically the storyboard, and go through and update the model controller, and then update the view controller. The reason that I sort of put it in this format, although the model and the views are somewhat interchangeable here, just like when we build any app from scratch, you can't really build out a full view controller or a full model controller without actually having the models built and the views built first. So it's really just coming down to updating the underlying core data model file with new attribute here, and going through and just kind of going through that whole line of MVC to reflect those changes. Overall, can you give me a 1 to 3 on how you feel with the process of migration? Like, do you feel like in the afternoon project, when it asks you to add a new, attribute, do you feel like you'll be able to do it? Okay, good. That's awesome. And it's really not hard, and that's the best part, is like lightweight migration just makes everything super easy. So the last thing I want to do before we talk about NSFetch results controller is just update the update views function so that it actually shows that priority. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say that our segmented control, the priority selected segment, priority segmented control selected segment index is, we're just going to say task dot, or let's, I just realized we probably have to do this on 2 lines. So I'm just going to say let priority index equal our task dot priority, or you know what? I'm sorry. Let's do this. Let's say task priority dot all cases again, and again making that a lowercase a on there. Then we'll say index of, and then we're going to say of our task. Ooh, we're going to need to do this on 3 lines. Sorry. Okay, the reason we have to do this on 3 lines is it wants a task priority here, but if we initialize one here, it's going to be optional. So what I'm going to do is say if let priority equals our task, or let's see, we'll say task priority, open the initializer with the raw value, and then pass in the task dot priority. That's optional too, but I'm just going to put, or we'll just say that it's normal. There we go. So assuming that we have a task and it has a priority, we'll make an actual instance of a task priority instead of just having it be the string. And then we can say, let's grab the index of that priority. So from the all cases, so if it's like normal, then it'll be 0, or it'll be 1. And then we can say selected segment index equals that priority index. Oh yeah, sorry, we don't use index of anymore. Do first index of that priority, and then we'll throw that in our if let statement, because that returns an optional. So that way it's kind of a long process, but we're just converting the task priority string into an actual task priority enum case, and then we use that enum case to figure out the index of the enum. And since we wrote, you can just watch me here. Since we wrote the enum in the exact same order as the segmented control, its index is automatically going to match up. So when it's like low, the index in the task priority is 0, and also on the segmented control as well is 0. And then, you know, from there, 1, 2, and 3. So let's run this and make sure that we've got everything working. At this point, you're not going to see anything different on the table view, but we should be able to create a task and have that show up. I'll just maybe make this critical, hit save. So you should be able to save it, go back in, and it should still be like critical for me.
What is the all cases?
So, oh yeah, sorry. If you didn't add this, which I kind of actually assume most of you didn't, I apologize. Go ahead and go to the task plus convenience file and then add this comma case iterable right here. And what that's going to do is just make it so that it will create an array of each of these cases for you, so you can access basically every case in an array itself. Sorry about that. That's my bad.
Hey, Spencer, while we're there, I'm getting an error on my self.priority.
Okay.
Is it, I'm thinking I may have not set something up in the XC data model.
Okay. Is your tasks 2, does it have a little green check mark right here, or does the task?
Oh, my task does, yeah.
So we just need to go in and set, if you just go into one of the data model files,
yeah,
just change this current model version right here to 2.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. One thing I didn't mention yesterday, but it's become less of an issue as of Xcode 10, and now Xcode 11 is even better. Sometimes the compiler doesn't play super well with core data. Sometimes it will kind of give you false errors, and it will say like, hey, like if you open up a core data project that you haven't looked at for a while, sometimes it'll say, you know, that there is no class called task, for example. Just thinks that it's not there. If you go ahead and just build the project and everything succeeds, that's okay. Sometimes it just gets a little bit confused and it doesn't quite realize that those are there because the file is being generated for you. So sometimes core data doesn't play super well with a compiler. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about an NSFetch results controller. So this is a really, really cool thing that core data provides, and it's actually something that helps us display information on table views and collection views better in a more efficient way, and it does a lot of the work for us. So what I mean by that is it's generally a lot of sort of busy work on your end to make it so that, you know, you've got like sections here and everything. So it's not hard to get the sections on the table view, but it's hard to figure out, okay, well, what if I change this created task from critical to, you know, normal or whatever? That entails, okay, I'm switching sections. I'm probably changing my index path.row as well. And so there's a lot of figuring out, you know, to go from where to where. That has to take place, and it's just kind of a lot of work to make it work in every situation and with every sort of edge case and use case that you can come across. So what an NSFetch results controller is, it does that for you. You give it some basic logic on how to move things around and update things, and it just does it for you whenever it sees a change. So it's really, really quite cool. So what we're going to do is go ahead and do that. So let's go to our table view controller, and we're going to replace this bad way of fetching tasks. I don't think I actually explained yesterday why this is bad. So let me just kind of, as an example, go and do this. You can just watch me here. Just going to make a couple tasks real quick. Okay. The problem with this is not the actual code inside of it, but the problem is that it's a computed property. Just kind of like we looked at yesterday, the difference between a computed property and a stored property is that this gets called over and over again. So when I hit through the play button here, every time that we access tasks, it's going to run a whole fetch request and go to the persistent store and get that information. So it hits it once, we go back, hits it again, go back, hits it again. Then we're calling it again here for each cell, so it's going to hit it at least 3 times. So we just performed 6 fetch requests when we really only needed to perform it once to get all of this information on the table view. So it's really overkill. And the more and fetch requests aren't the most expensive resource thing. The most expensive thing resource-wise, but at the same time, it's still, taking up some processing power and some memory just to fetch these things, and not to mention time. So the least amount of times that we can get away with doing this, the better. And obviously, the more complicated you get, if you have 10 cells, then that ends up calling it 10 more times, and it's just sort of exponentially going to, make work for the app that really just doesn't need to do it because it's fetching the same information. So what I want to do is just comment this out because I think it's good that you know about it, but we're going to replace it with something better, which is the fetch results controller. So this one is also going to be lazy, and I'll show you another reason why lazy is actually really cool. So I'm going to call this fetch results controller. And this is like the last time that we'll talk about generics before we actually get to our generics lesson, I believe. So it's going to be an NSFetch results controller, and we're going to say that it's going to be managing task objects, and that's going to be its generic type that it uses. And then this is just going to be a stored property, so it's going to be a closure. But again, we're just storing that value. It's going to compute that the very first time that we access this fetch results controller variable. But then from there, it's all set up when we don't need to, do any of this again. We start out the same way. We need a fetch request. If we just say let frc equal NSFetch results controller, and we'll just pull up the initializer and comment it out real quick. You'll see we need 4 things. We need a fetch request, a manage object context, a section name key path, and a cache name. So we'll be talking about each of these. I'm going to comment that out just so you can kind of look at what we're going to have. So the first thing we need is a fetch request. And for us, we're again just going to say, I want to fetch all of the tasks in core data. So we'll just say let fetch request be of type NSFetch request, and we'll say that we're fetching tasks. And it's just going to be task.fetch request. Making fetch requests now is so easy. It used to be that you had to write out a string, and it was kind of a pain, but it's significantly improved. So one interesting thing is we can also say, like you can see there's not really, well, it just happens that there's sort of an order on this one. But these tasks could be, ordered in really kind of any way. So if I put like, whoops, didn't need to do that. There we go. You can see now there's not really any order to this, like it's not ordered alphabetically or anything. One of these has a low priority, one of these has a critical priority, the other one has low. It's sort of all over the place. what we can do is actually say, hey, as you're performing this fetch request and bundling up all of the tasks that you're going to return to me from the persistent store, go ahead and sort through them and order them in a way that I want so that you don't have to sort them later. What's actually cool about that is if you ask the persistent store to sort things, it's actually much faster at sorting than it would be you trying to sort them after the fact once they've already been fetched. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add, to start with just a single sort descriptor, and then we can add another one for, oh no, we could probably do both actually. So let's go fetch request, and then on our fetch request, we're going to say dot sort descriptors, and this is how we describe how we want things to be sorted. And it takes in an array. So we're going to say ns sort descriptor. And if we open the initializer, we get a few options here. So there are a few ways that we can do this. Let's try this. I've never actually used this before. I think this is new, but it should make it so that we don't actually have to write out a string for the key, which is cool. Well, here, we'll do both. We'll do it like the way that I know it's going to work, and then I'll show you the other way, and you can comment out one or the other. So all we need to do for the key is say what key or what attribute name do we want to sort by. So what we're going to do is first sort things by priority so that when we run this, everything is like all of the critical tasks are together and then all of the low tasks are together. And then we can make it so that they're sorted by like name within each of these sections here. So we're going to say we want to sort by priority, and we'll say that the ascending is true. So that critical is at the top, and then it goes down from there. If you want it to be the opposite, where low is at the top, you would make it descending. Actually, I think it's not quite that way because we're using strings. It will be a little bit out of order, but for what we're doing, that's completely fine. Key paths are somewhat new, but there are actually a couple ways that you can do it. So if we wanted to do the same thing using a key path, you could do, it's this backslash and then dot, and then you would do priority like that. Oh, you know what? Maybe that's only with, hold on. There we go. So you would say task dot priority like that. Hello, I need to look into this. I think this is new. I've never seen that before. It must be new with Xcode 11. But in theory, you would do something like that, and it would make it so that you don't have to write out the string and potentially mess it up. That's all the key path is. So then what we're going to do is we can say, let's sort it by name so they're like alphabetical. So I'll just add another sort descriptor with the key, and then we'll do name. And again, we'll just make this ascending.
If you made that false, would it then just be descending instead of ascending?
What's that?
If you made that false, would it then just be in like the descending order instead of ascending order?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't specify that at all. Yeah, if you just say false, then you're saying I don't want it to be ascending, I want it to be descending. It's just one or the other. All right, so let's go to this now. Now we have our fetch request, so we can throw that in there, and now it has a way to be sorted. The manage object context is just the manage object context that you want these things to be fetched on. And we're just going to use our core data stack.shared.main context.
Hey, Spencer.
Yeah.
I have a question. What exactly is the second sort descriptor doing? Because I understood what the first one was doing, but I'm not sure what the second.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the first one obviously is going to sort by section, so all of the critical ones are together. But then within those, we're going to make it so that they are sorted. So like all of the low priority ones are sorted alphabetically within each section themselves. Does that make sense? Okay. So this section name, key path, and cache name, you'll actually notice they're both strings, but they're string optional, so we don't have to include something in here. So if you want your table view to have sections like we have here, then we need to say, how do you want to sort everything into sections? And this is just a key path again, so we can say priority, and then that will say, for every unique value that there is as a priority, as a value for priority, it will make a section. As an example, I'll change my solution code to use name, and you'll see like what it does. It's a little funky, but it just makes a, like I just said that the section name key path here was name instead of priority, and it just made a section for each name, right? But since our priority itself only has 4 values, then we know like we'll only ever have 4 sections, or in this case we only have 2, but yeah, that's essentially what we're doing here. The cache name, you can basically say like, hey, I want to cache the results of this, and it's not something you use like hardly at all. I've actually never used it like in a real app before. So all we're going to do is just say nil. We don't want to cache anything. We're fine to just have it refetch things. We're not dealing with any super huge amounts of data that would make it so that it would be poorly performant in any way. So then there's 2 last things we need to do. This fetch results controller is kind of like a data task where you have to resume it in order for it to sort of start working. So what we need to say is we're going to say try frc.perform fetch, and that's what says fetch and start like loading the table view basically. That's the tasks. I'll just put that. Then on our catch, we'll just make a fatal error and say like error performing fetch for FRC. We'll throw in our error. The last thing we need to do is make it so that we are able to communicate with this fetch results controller. So the way that we basically tell the fetch results controller what it needs to do when there's some sort of a change, like we add a new task, we delete one or whatever, is through a delegate protocol called the NSFetch results controller delegate. So what I'm going to do is jump up to, you know what, let's actually do this. We'll put it in an extension. So I'm just going to say frc.delegate equals self, and it's going to yell at us here, and that's okay. So right before we perform the fetch, we're going to assign ourselves as the delegate, ourselves as the view controller, to be the delegate of the fetch results controller, sorry. And we'll use that to tell the table view, like, hey, when you see, you know, this change, when I change this from, you know, critical to low or something, you need to move it over here or whatever. And it's really generic, which is awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and at the very bottom of the file, go ahead and make an extension on this tasks table view controller and set it as the NSFetch results controller delegate, just so that it will stop yelling at us here for that specifically. So now that we've changed our data source here, we're not using this variable called tasks anymore. We're running everything through this fetch results controller. We need to go through and just change the functions that we did yesterday to set up the table view, then also to pass the task over to use the fetch results controller. So what ends up happening is it's sort of like if I don't quite have that, I don't really want to take the time to pull it up either, but I will just pull this up really quickly and we'll just do a very quick and dirty drawing. Oh, that's why. There we go. Okay. Well, it took that much time anyway. But if we have our sort of box here, you know, we have like the manage object context and everything, and we're out here. It's sort of like the FRC exists in between us and the mock here. So we've got the FRC, us. Sorry, I've got a little circle in the way. There we go. And so it sort of is the intermediary between now us and the mock. So we don't directly interact with the mock anymore. Instead, we basically just said like, hey, here's the manage object context. Here's what I want you to fetch, which are tasks. And it's going to manage sort of that communication for us. And so we don't have to do that work. It's fairly hands-off. So let's go ahead and jump to this. And now we don't have that tasks variable. So instead, we'll ask the fetch results controller for those objects. So we're going to say, hey, how many rows do we want in the section? But now we actually have to think about, now we've got multiple sections. So this number of rows in section, we've always used as how many rows do you, or how many cells do you want in the table view? But really it's how many cells do you want in each individual section? So here, for this first section, we want 1, but in this second one, we want 2. I actually think there's a third one, but it's like, doesn't have a title. So what we're actually going to need to do is, like, for the first time, probably ever for you, for most of you, we're actually going to use the number of sections in table view and actually tell it how many sections it needs. The cool part about this is the fetch results controller knows all of that information just by way of it managing everything about the tasks for us. So what we're going to do is ask it for, it has this sections property, and for how many sections we want, it's just an array, so we can just say fetch results controller.sections.count, and it will give us that number. So we'll say return fetch results controller sections.count, and that sections is optional, so I'm just going to say or using the nil coalescing operator 0. So the way that this, oh, did someone have a question? Sorry.
Why wouldn't you put 1?
If there are no sections, then that means there's no information to display, so it doesn't really make sense to be displaying anything or to be making a section at all. To the user, there would be almost no difference, but it's just like less work that you end up having to do, that the app has to do, really. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So for example, what I mean by that, by less work is, let's say we have this example here of 2 sections where we're just returning 2 here. And so what it does is it actually calls this function 2 times because it has to know, okay, for section 0, how many cells do we want? We say we want to return 1. Then it says, okay, sweet. Now for section 2, or rather for section 1, because it starts at 0, how many cells do you want in this section? And if you had another section, it would call it again. So it's going to call this function as many times as there are sections. So if we say 0, it says, oh, I don't even need to set up any sections or cells at all because there are none. So it's less work. And then the self-row index path gets called for as many rows that you return here for each section. So if in total you called, if there are 20 cells that you set up, it's going to call this 20 times. And that's not actually how it really works because of like cell dequeuing. So if like you have 100 things that you return, it won't actually call this 100 times immediately. It'll call it every time that a cell is going to appear on the screen using an index path. So going back to the documentation here on this sections variable that we just used, it's of type NS fetch results section info, and it literally just has infinite information on that section. So how many objects should be in it, which is perfect for what we're going to use because we need to know how many rows should be in a section, and we say just as many objects as there are in this section info. And then later we'll also use this name to create our section titles. So we can say, let's go through our fetch results controller dot sections. And then you're going to have to put the question mark here yourself because it won't put it there for you. And then we're going to use the section that we get here as an index. So we'll say section dot number of objects, again, or 0. So what's happening here is we access this sections property, which is an array. Then we use this section object that we get from the function itself to say, all right, well, what section are we setting up? The first time this runs, the section would be 0. And so we say, hey, go grab me the first section in this array at the 0th index and tell me how many objects should be in it. And it's going to be like, oh, yeah, you need one section or one row in there. Then it does the same thing. This time section is 1. Number of objects will be 2.
Why is it number of objects and not just dot count?
I don't know. Well, it's not, I mean, what you could do in theory is you could say like objects.count, but like that's more work. So they probably just made number of objects to make it less work for you. I'm not sure. That would be my guess. I don't have a great answer for you though. Just some, decision that a developer came up with. All right, let's jump down to here. So this is an interesting thing. Whenever you think of index path, what do you generally use on the index path?
Row.
The row, right? We think index path.row almost as if it's one thing, but let's actually look at an index path and see what it has because it's actually really a two-part thing. So really it ends up being that if you want to, let's see. Well, for everything that we use an index path for, there's actually really there's two things that we end up using, which is the row, but also the section. And again, we've never used this because we've never had a sectioned out table view before. But as an example, the index path.row of this critical Z created task right here is 0, but also right here, the index path.row of this F cell is also 0. So the index path.row just defines, where within a section the cell is, but they share the same index path.row. So in order to further specify which one we're talking about, we say the index path.section of this cell is 0, and then the index path.section of this cell would be 1. So even though they have the same index path.row, they have a different section between them. Does that make sense? So what we can do is we could, there are a couple things we could do. We could either go through and figure out using, whoops, not that, go away, there we go. Using this section info that we just looked at, we could say, all right, well, let's go into the correct section info and then grab its objects and pull the item out of that, like the task that we want. But it turns out like NS fetch results controller just made it easy for us. And there's a function called object at index path where we just give it a full index path with both the section and the row, and it will return us the right task. And we don't have to like go through a bunch of like this huge long line of code just to get the object. So what we're going to do is say that the cells text label dot text equals, then we can just say fetch results controller dot object at index path and just place in the whole index path, not like the row, not the section, but like the whole thing. And then it's able to figure out, you know, which section it's coming from and which row it should be at. Oh, yeah, sorry. And then we'll just do dot name. My bad. And then we'll do the exact same line for in the prepare for segue here. Instead of doing tasks index path dot row, we'll just say fetch results controller dot object to index path. Oh, sorry. I forgot one last line on here. If we jump back up to the top in the fetch results controller, we just need to return the FRC so that the variable itself actually has a value. Otherwise, we were just kind of keeping the fetch results controller in this closure, never giving it to the variable up here itself. So let's run this and look at your first, potentially, table view with sections and see how it looks. And there's no difference. So what's interesting about this is there are actually sections. I think I can show you it here in the debugger. Maybe not. There are actually sections here, like all of the code is working correctly, but unless you basically have a section header or a section footer, it doesn't actually end up separating them, or it doesn't at least look like it is. The easiest way to do that is there is a function, a delegate method. I actually think it's on table view data source, not delegate. Not that one. Yeah, title for header and section. I always forget which protocol it's in, but we just return a string saying, hey, this is what I want the section to be named. So we can just say, you know, name it the same thing as whatever everything is separated out into sections by using the fetch results controller. So just right under like the self row index path, let's just call title for header in section. And we just return a string here. So I'm going to grab the string from that section info that we were just using earlier. So what I'm going to do is grab our, I'm going to say, let's unwrap this section info. The good part about this is we can return nil since the string that we're returning is optional. So it'll just put nothing there if we don't have the information we need. I'm just going to say fetch results controller dot sections, and then we'll use the section that we get from this argument here in this function. Although we will have to put the question mark there because it won't do it by itself. And then we'll just say else return nil. There is no section info, but there should be always. And then that section info also, if we go back to it, has that name that I was talking about. And so this name is getting generated from whatever we said that our section name key path should be. So it's just going to be like low, medium, high, or low, normal, high, critical. But they're going to be returned as lowercase strings. But what we can do is we can just say return the section info's name. Then there's this really handy capitalized property that just capitalizes the first letter. And so we don't have to worry about, like creating another string or anything to make it look a little bit more user-friendly or like just cleaner looking. But now just by adding that, you'll see that we now have two sections here. Okay, so we're about 75% done with the fetch results controller. We just need to do the delegate methods, and luckily they're fairly quick and straightforward. Can you guys give me a 1 to 3 on how you feel so far with setting up the fetch results controller? So it's really setting up this lazy variable here and then just changing all of your data source methods to use the fetch results controller instead. Okay, cool. That's about where I'd expect us all to be. I think it's more than anything a matter of practice, and seeing it again is going to be super helpful for like in the afternoon project will sort of help you solidify where, what everything needs to be changed. So at this point, everything is essentially working. Like if I want, I could change this to be, normal again, and it wouldn't update. That's the problem. That's the one part where it looks good until you try to change things, and then the fetch results controller doesn't really see like that things need to be changed. And so what's interesting about this is we still reloaded the table view, but the fetch results controller said like, I haven't changed the data source at all, so nothing happened. Even if I go into this, like we see that it did change, like the priority is normal, but the table view isn't really representing that visually. So in order to do that, we're going to use this NSFetch results controller delegate method or protocol. So there are 4 functions. 2 of them are super easy. They're one-liners, and then the other 2 are a little bit more work, but not hard at all. So just go ahead and write these with me. It's a little bit of work. There's functions that look really, really similar. But the first one is controller will change content, then controller did change content. The next one is, so just write this out with me exactly as I'm typing it. So it's just did change, let's see, an object. And these 2 look really, really similar. But you want the one with the new index path at the end. So it says it notifies the receiver that a fetched object has changed due to an add, remove, move, or update. And it looks like that. It's super long and daunting looking, but not actually hard. And then the next one is controller did change section info. And it's this one, notifies the receiver of an addition or removal of a section. Again, looks like a lot, but it's not, especially this one. So the cool part about this is the way that it works is because, oh shoot, I kind of deleted that quick drawing. The way that it works is since that fetch results controller is sort of in between us and the managed object context, what it's going to do is be continually looking at the managed object context to see when there are changes. And when there are changes, it's going to call one of these functions, or multiple, depending on what the change is, to say, hey, I just saw that like there was a new task created or a task moved from one section to the other. And these functions are basically saying, what do you want me to do? How do you want the table view to interact with these changes? And so all these two need to do is we're going to say table view dot begin updates. So like it says here, well, that's not a great explanation, but what it does is it basically prepares the table view to change things about it. So insert, delete, move, update rows in a visually pleasing way. So it makes it so that like when you insert a row, it like slides in from the left with like an animation instead of just like jumping in and just like from one frame to the other, just like being there. And then finally, we say table view dot end updates to say, hey, I'm done with that. It's a little bit intensive in order to do that, to have the table view prepared to like visually, animate everything in. And so we only begin the updates right as soon as we're going to change something. And then as soon as we're done, we say end updates, so it's not taking up the resources to be prepared to do those changes. So for example, as soon as we create a task here, we could actually, let me run it now. But you'll actually see like these get called. It's not really going to do much, but if I change this from low to high, you'll see that it calls this and it says, hey, I just saw that this task has changed. This task has changed in some way. And so it's going to say, hey, we're going to begin changing some content. So we tell the table view, hey, I'm going to like make some new cells or do something, be ready to make it look good. And then finally, it's going to change. After it's finished, we say controller did change content. Everything changed. So we're good. It's going to yell at us here, but it'll fix it when we actually like get something running. It's yelling at us because we're not actually really doing anything yet, but don't worry about that. So as far as these two go, it's basically us telling the table view what needs to happen based on some specific change type. So there's a lot here. Ultimately, what we care about are these last three things here: the index path, the type, and the new index path. So this type is the biggest thing, and it's actually just an enum with the different kinds of updates that could happen. So we insert a new task, we delete one, we move one, so that would be like moving it from one section to another or reordering it in some way. And then updating would just be like, maybe we, I crashed. Update would be like, we keep it at the same place, but maybe, we change the name. And so we need to update the cell to, show that new updated name or whatever. So we just need to do a different thing based on what this change type is. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to switch on the type, and we'll just make a case for each of them. So we'll do case insert, case delete, in no particular order here, case move, and case update. Oops, there we go. It's going to yell at you once you do this with kind of a cool warning, which I think is kind of cool. They just started doing this in like Swift 5. It says that the switch covers known cases, but this NSFetch results change type may have additional unknown values possibly added in future versions. So it's saying like, hey, this is good. This handles all of the current enum cases, but there could be more potentially like in the future. So in order to sort of make it so that your app is a little bit future-proof and until you can actually get to updating it, go ahead and you can use this @unknown default. And it just says to like fatal error out, which I think is fine. Or you could just say, let's just return out of the function. It's kind of up to you. You can leave it as fatal error for now, though. So all we have to do is basically say like, hey, there was a change, to a task, like one was just created. So on the table view side, what would we want to do when there's a new task? What do you guys think?
Insert.
What's that?
Insert.
Insert what?
A new task? A new index path?
You're on the right track. Insert a new task. How? Like what represents a task on this table view? Oh, Jonathan said it. Yeah, add a row or add a cell, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to call table view dot insert rows at index path. So we just need to say, hey, like I'm adding this new cell, and we're going to say add a new cell at this specific place in the table view. And we're going to use this new index path. So when there's a new cell, it's going to have a new index path. The thing with this is both the index path and new index path are actually optional. So depending on what the change type is, there could be one index path and not the other, or there could be both. For the insert, though, we're going to use the new index path. And that makes sense. When we're going to insert something new, it will have a brand new index path. So we're going to say, and we just need to unwrap it so we can use it. So we'll say, guard let new index path equals new index path. Else we will return. And then we can say insert rows at our index path. And it just has to be in an array because that's what the function accepts. And then this UI table view.row animation is just an enum where you can choose kind of how the cell is inserted. I personally, I'm not personally very adventurous. I just generally go with automatic, but you're welcome to play around with these and see how they sort of differ. As far as like how they appear. Oh, sorry, and then I didn't even use that new index path. My bad. Here we go. So what do you guys think about for delete?
Just delete the row?
Yeah, we're going to do delete rows, right? Which index path do you think we want, the new one or the old one? Not the old one, but just the index path.
Just the index path?
Yeah, right. We're deleting something that already exists there, so it's not like there's a new index path. And if you're ever curious and you didn't know this, you could just use breakpoints and kind of figure out, which thing is used in which, and when it's optional and when it's not, or when it's nil and when it's not, rather. So we're going to say guard let index path equals index path. Then we'll just call table view, and it's just delete rows at index path. And again, I'm not adventurous, so I'll just do automatic for the animation type. Do we follow so far? Are we feeling okay with this? Okay. Oh, did someone have a question? Okay, I thought I heard someone unmute. All right, so what about for move? Which index path do you think we're going to use?
Both.
Both, right? We're moving from one place to another, so we need both. Say guard let index path equals index path, and new index path equals new index path. Let's return. We'll say, so we've got kind of two options here. As far as the move goes, this isn't actually visually animated. Like there's no visual like sort of swapping of the cells, just kind of happens, unless you want to do it sort of a different way. So we've got two options. We'll do the first one in sort of the normal-ish way, which is move row at index path to a new index path. Oops. There we go. So it's saying take the cell that's already created. You don't have to reload it or anything. Just move it visually on the table view. This actually was broken for like years, like the first 2 years of like me learning iOS development. You couldn't use this. It would always crash every single time. So what we would do instead, just if you wanted to, you could do table view dot delete rows at the old index path, and then you would do table view dot insert rows at the new index path, and that's essentially how you would move the row. And that would also make it so that it is visually animated if you like that, but you just need to choose one or the other. They both end up doing the same thing, except the move row doesn't do an animation. So it's up to you. All right, what about an update? Which index path are we going to use?
The regular index path?
Yeah. If we've just got a cell that we're just changing like its name on, we're not moving it around or anything to a new place, but we're just keeping it at the same place. We just need to kind of update it. We'll update we'll grab the normal index path. We can say table view dot, then there's like reload data, but that reloads the whole table view, but there's a reload rows at index path. And so we can pass in that index path and have that also be animated as well, which is nice. All right, what questions do you have about this function? I know there's kind of a lot here. I promise it's not as bad as it looks, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Could you possibly explain move a bit more in depth, like what that's doing?
Yeah. I mean, it's literally just like if we, like, let's say, for example, these are being sorted correctly, and maybe we change this S task to be like A, so it's, you know, sorted before it should be above this F. All it would do is it would just swap the index paths up here. So it says, hey, we're going to go to this new row up here. And so it's, well, it would actually be more like putting it right here. And so it just moves that F cell down. So we're just saying go from its original index path here to a new index path here. And it just takes a cell, and it's just like almost like you dragging it up into a new place on the table view. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I had like a vague description of it beforehand.
Oh, you're good. All right, so let's do this last function here and we'll be done. So there was actually kind of a little bit of a hint here. Let me see if I can get it to, there we go. So it says the fetch results controller reports changes to, oh no, not that one. There we go. Notifies the receiver of the addition or removal of a section. So there are only two sort of changes that can happen on a section. You notice that we again use this NSFetch results change type enum that we just used up here that has insert, delete, move, update. But for a section, there's only inserting and deleting. There is no moving or updating of sections. So we don't have to handle those. But we're going to start it off the same way. We'll just say switch on our type. We'll say case insert and case delete, and then we'll just have a default. And we'll break. Actually, we can just return out of the function. We're not doing anything else. So all we have to do is essentially the same process here of moving, or sorry, inserting or deleting now sections instead of cells. The one like gotcha here, which is just like some like, it's not hard, but it's nothing we've seen before, is if we call like table view.insert sections, we see that it takes in an index set, which we've never really talked too much about sets before. So that's like the one gotcha here. So I'm gonna write this out, and then for anyone that wants to stick around, I'm happy to talk about what an index set is. And we actually use the index set whether it's on insert or delete, so we don't have to do kind of like what we did here where we unwrap them each individually in each case, but we can actually just make the index set once. So I'm just gonna say the index set equal index set, and we're gonna use this one that takes in the integer, and we're just gonna take in that section index that is this argument from the function. Basically what we're saying here is, hey, we wanna insert a section at a specific index, so whether it's section 0, which would be low, or section 1, which would be normal. We're either going to insert a section there or we're going to delete one there. But we use the index set either way. Just make sure you use the lowercase I index set. And again, I'm just going to do automatic. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll just say delete sections at the index set with automatic. So before I talk about this, I just wanted to touch on one thing because students tend to have this problem. And it's not very explicitly talked about unless you dive into the documentation. And it doesn't have anything to do with this. So go ahead and scroll up with me to the fetch results controller lazy variable. If you, let's see. Yeah, it's not gonna. If you're going to use the section name key path right here, where we say, hey, we want this to be, sort of, or sectioned out into different priorities. There's one thing that you have to remember to do, and luckily it'll yell at you and it'll tell you what to do if you, it'll crash on you and it'll tell you that you need to do it. It says, if the key path is not the same as specified by the first descriptor in the sort descriptor in the fetch request, well, basically it's saying you have to do that. Like it's saying, or you can generate the same relative orderings, but you would never do that. That's not quite as good as I was looking for. I have a comment here. I'll give you this comment that I want you all to paste into your code because this will help you remember as you're referencing it later. I'm just going to put it right above the sort descriptors. So when you use a section name key path like priority, your fetch request must have at the very least one sort descriptor, if not more, like we're using 2 here and that's fine, but the first one has to be the same key path as your section name key path. Otherwise, one, it could just crash on you and say, hey, you have no sort descriptors, or at the very least, or sort of in a more annoying sense, if, for example, name was the first sort descriptor, what would happen is things wouldn't quite be sorted properly. They might look okay as soon as you run the app, but as soon as you start moving things around, the index paths get all messed up and they're not quite in the right order. So you need to make sure that if you use a section name key path, the first sort descriptor is the same key path. It doesn't matter if it's ascending or descending, it just has to be that same key path that it first sorts by. Otherwise, if you make it nil and you say, I don't want any sections, you don't have to worry about that and you don't need sort descriptors. But that's just one thing I wanted to mention here. All right, you should be able to run it and it should work fine. I recognize that we're already over time by about 10 minutes. So if you're not interested in sticking around for 5 or 10 more minutes while we talk about index sets and sets in general, you're more than welcome to head out right now. Otherwise, if you do want to stick around then, and you're fine with taking, lunch and 10 minutes later than now, you can feel free to stick around. So, what do you guys know about sets? What is a set? What is an array?
Group of objects or things?
Yeah, it's a group of objects. Perfect. So we could say that a set belongs to what we would call like collection types. So a collection type would be like an array or a dictionary or a set. Those are probably like the main collection types that we have. So let's kind of define these and see how they're similar and different than each other. So what is an array? How would you explain what an array is and how it functions? Like maybe as opposed to a dictionary or something, like what's the difference? So it's a group of objects that what?
Has the same type.
What's that?
Group of objects has the same type.
Yeah, they have the same type. Perfect. What else?
They're in order by the index.
Yeah, they're ordered, right? They have indexes, so they're ordered. That's kind of a key thing. What else? That's pretty good. I mean, it's a group of objects, right? It's ordered, and they have the same type. I think that pretty much sums it up. What about a dictionary in contrast here? How are arrays and dictionaries different?
Well, don't dictionaries have a value that matches the key?
Yes, right? So they have key value pairs instead of just like a single object, like, you know, instead of just a group of objects, it's sort of like a group of key value pairs where there's a value, but in order to access the value, you use the key instead of using like an index like you would on an array. Okay, what else?
They're not ordered.
They are unordered. Perfect. Yep. There's no specific order to a dictionary. And that's exactly why if you get JSON back and if you were ever to decode it as a dictionary, which you totally could, it will come back in a different order every time because there's just no order. So what about a set? We don't really use sets too often, but this is a prime example of one we are. So what's the difference or similarities between arrays and dictionaries to sets? And if you don't know, that's okay. Okay, so it's similar to an array. I would say it's most similar to an array. So they're just like single objects. I'm gonna put that up in array as well, as opposed to like key value pairs. So they're single objects, but they are unordered as well. So it's sort of like this weird like middle ground in between an array and a dictionary. So as an example, let's look at an array. So my array. You'd say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. This is an array. I always know that like my array at the 0th index is going to be 1, right? Should maybe start that at 0, but that's okay. And then, you know, the dictionary is not going to be ordered that way. But what a set does is it's also unordered. And so if I were to make a set, and I'm just going to kind of cheat and use this array as my information, you'll see that here it's 6, 1, 2, 5, 3, 7, 4. And then if I run this again, it's in a completely different order every single time. So in that sense, it's like a dictionary. But there's also one other thing that makes sets unique. Does anyone know what it is? Okay. You can. Oh.
Does each object in a set have like its own like unique value?
Yes, exactly. So you cannot have duplicate values, which is interesting. So as an example here, again, if we look at my array, and maybe I have like 3 1s here, like that's totally cool, right? You can have as many number 1s as you want. But as soon as I make this into a set with this exact same array, you'll see that it removes the extra 1, so you can't have a duplicate there at all. So that's, I would say, the biggest difference between sets and arrays and dictionaries is you can't have a duplicate value. In a similar way, you know, dictionaries kind of can't have the duplicate values where, like, you know, if you have a dictionary like key value, you can't have like 2 keys of the same name, right? Like if I say I'm gonna actually have to make this a variable. My dictionary the key equals the value, like that overwrites it. It's not like it would make a new, it would make, key new value and then like another key called key with value. Like you can't have duplicates in that way. So again, it's kind of like this weird middle ground in between arrays and dictionaries. So, let me ask, are there any questions about sets or anything that we've talked about with these collection types here?
What's the best use case for a set?
Generally I'll use a set, and again, this is like very infrequently. I think I've used sets maybe like 5 times ever, like in a real app, but it would be mostly used for when you want to get rid of duplicates or you want to prevent duplicates in the first place. What's cool about this, and you can see this, is if you pass in a set of information that does have duplicates, it'll remove them for you, which is kind of cool. So that can be one thing. Generally, that would be the biggest reason. They're probably a little bit more efficient as far as space goes as compared to an array. But if you want things like indexes and having an order, then using an array is more important. And that's generally what we do want. But I would say whenever you want to sort of prevent any duplicates, you just throw everything in a set, and you will never have a duplicate. So going back to our code here, then we make an index set, which is literally just a set that has indexes that's specifically used for just indexes of something. And so really all we're saying here when we make an index set is, hey, I want a set, like a collection of indexes, and I want to make sure that there are no duplicates. So it makes sense that you can never have like 2 section zeros in a table view. There's always going to be only one section 0, one section 1, section 2, one section 3, and so on. And so really all we're doing, and I honestly don't know why they couldn't have just used a set here. I suppose it's just so that you make sure that the value is only an integer here, or using an index. But that's all we're saying here, is we're saying insert sections at this collection of indexes, and you also make sure that you don't try to add that section twice. That's really all that's happening here with this index set. Yeah, so a collection of unique integer values that represent the indexes of elements in another collection. That's it. So there's not really anything super special with what we're doing as opposed to like this being an index set and just a normal set. We're just saying it's a set of just integers, and that's it. So are there any questions about sets or how this index set is working? Okay, can you guys give me like a 1 to 3 on how you feel with just like sets in general? Like your usage of them? Do you think you could use them? Okay, cool. All right, guys, that's everything I have. So we haven't actually ran this, but you should be able to just try something real quick. Just move this S maybe down to high. It should make a new section and everything. So the order of the sections is the only thing that is a little bit weird because we're using strings to like get sorted by. So it's not in like any great order here, but you'll see it's kind of random. But we could have changed that by making our priorities like an integer instead of being a string, and just having the raw values of those integers be like the actual strings themselves. But this works great for what we're doing. So I will leave you at that. I'm happy to stick around if anyone has any specific questions. Otherwise, I'll just post the solution code in the iOS10 channel and let you guys go to lunch. I've kept you long enough, and I apologize. So are there any questions that anyone has?
Yeah, Spencer. Sometimes I noticed that when I add a task, right, it doesn't populate right away, and then I'll have to build it or run it maybe 2 or 3 times later, and then it'll come up. And then after that, it'll come up, instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So
I've never seen that before. If the fetch results controller should just see that you have that object immediately and put it on the table view. Was it doing this like yesterday, or is it just today that it's doing that?
Yeah, it was pretty much doing it yesterday too. Could it have anything to do with me having too many apps open, or just like a slow computer? Or?
I don't think so. If anything, you might just give it a little bit of time to save, like just hit the save button and wait before you close the app, like 5 seconds. But it shouldn't be. I wouldn't assume that would make a difference.
Okay, I'll try to duplicate it if it's no big deal.
Okay, let me know, but I don't think that's anything wrong with your code per se. So.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
When I try to save one of the tasks, it's populating back on the cell.
It didn't go back on the cell?
No, it's just like when I press save, the table view controller is still blank.
Do you mind sharing your screen?
I'm on the other. Oh wait.
Oh. Do they show up initially? Like when you load the app, does some show up?
No, nothing shows up.
Nothing shows up. Okay. Then I would say make sure that on your lazy var fetch results controller at the top of the table view controller, make sure that you have this, and you also, well, actually, it's really all of this.
Yeah, I have that.
I'm not quite sure then. I'm happy to, if you want, you can send me your project and I can try to look at it.
Okay.
That way you can go to lunch and we can.
Okay.
I'm not going to keep you from your lunch, but I will look at it and let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, cool. All right, we'll call it there. Have a great lunch, guys. Please take a full lunch. Don't cut your lunch break short or anything. So have a great lunch, and we'll talk to you later.